Let's just dive right in, shall we? Welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're unpacking a really fascinating high-stakes topic, kind of the roller coaster that's been the Greater Vancouver apartment market from early 2023 right through to mid-2026. The data we've got from Greater Vancouver REALTORS paints this super vivid picture of supply, demand, and what's actually happening at the closing table. So if you've been trying to make sense of this market, you are exactly where you need to be.
To really get the most out of this data, we're splitting things into 4 quick parts. First, the big picture. Second, tracking market supply. Third, measuring market speed. And finally, final closing realities.
Now, before we get into the hard numbers, I want you to keep one central question in the back of your mind. Where is the Greater Vancouver apartment market actually heading? It's so easy to hear rumors about crazy bidding wars or sudden market cooldowns, but the numbers tell the true story. So as we go through this, ask yourself how these trends are shaping the future of real estate in this city.
All right, part 1, the big picture, looking at those headline numbers. The sheer consistency we're seeing here is honestly pretty striking. We're talking about the MLS Housing Price Index, or HPI. You can think of this as the benchmark price for your typical Vancouver apartment, filtering out, the ultra-luxury penthouses and the absolute lowest-tier units. Back at the start of 2023, we were sitting down around the $680,000 mark. Fast forward through 2024, 2025, and into 2026, and we are crossing the $780,000 threshold. That is a steady, almost relentless upward climb over 3 years. Despite any broader economic hiccups, the fundamental value of a benchmark apartment has marched definitively higher.
Building right on that, the median sales price tells us the exact midpoint of all actual sales, and it tracks that benchmark HPI almost perfectly, just at a slightly lower price point. In early 2023, the median sales price was hovering just above $640,000. By 2026, it's pushed right up to $740,000. So the takeaway here is that this isn't just some theoretical increase in property values on paper. The actual everyday baseline cost for a buyer trying to get into the middle of the market has consistently gone up by about $100,000 in just 3 years.
To really put that into perspective, let's look at the absolute math. Whether you're looking at the benchmark price or the median sales price, the story is exactly the same in absolute dollars. We're looking at a roughly $100,000 increase in baseline apartment costs from 2023 to 2026. Percentage-wise, that's almost a 15% jump for the benchmark and over 15.5% for the median. That is massive equity growth for anyone who bought back in early 2023, and obviously a pretty huge new hurdle for anyone trying to enter the market today.
And it's not just the price tags that are huge, it's the sheer amount of capital flowing through the city. When you look at the total dollar volume of closed sales, you can clearly see the intense seasonal rhythms of the Vancouver market. During the slower winter months, total dollar volume dips down to maybe the $400 to $600 million range. But then you have these towering peaks. During the busy spring and summer markets, the total volume of money changing hands, on apartments alone, mind you, spikes up to $1.4 billion and even hits a staggering $1.6 billion. That is an unbelievable amount of liquidity pulsing through the local economy every single cycle.
Moving on to part 2, tracking market supply and what the inventory story looks like. When we compare the fresh new listings coming in against the total active inventory, we get a brilliant look at the true supply dynamic. Every single year, we get this surge of fresh product hitting the market, with new listings peaking around 3,000 to 3,500 units during the busiest months. But check this out. While new listings max out at 3,500, the total available inventory swings between 3,000 and 8,000 units. This shows us the critical relationship between fresh stock and lingering stock. Because even when a flood of new listings arrives, the total inventory never quite spirals out of control. The market is constantly absorbing these new units, which is exactly what prevents a massive supply glut that would traditionally drive prices down.
All right, part 3, measuring market speed, diving into the demand side. So, if supply isn't overwhelming the market, just how aggressive are the buyers? Let's start with raw unit sales. Much like the total dollar volume we just looked at, raw sales are highly cyclical. You get these quiet periods dipping down to around 600 to 800 sales a month. But as soon as the market heats up, buyer activity just explodes. You get these predictable but absolutely intense peaks where sales surge to 1,600, 1,800, and sometimes almost 2,000 transactions in a single month. This is literally what a buyer frenzy looks like. When that seasonal window opens up, buyers rush in aggressively to lock down a property before the year's price adjustments price them out completely.
But to truly gauge market heat, we need to talk about the sales to actives ratio. If you're not familiar, this metric just measures the percentage of available inventory that actually sells in any given month. Basically, a ratio below 0.12 means you're in a buyer's market where prices might actually fall. A ratio above 0.20, that's a seller's market where prices are climbing. This one simple decimal point is honestly the ultimate measure of who holds the power at the negotiating table.
Now, looking at the actual reality in Greater Vancouver, the baseline during the absolute slowest periods barely even drops below 0.1 or 0.2. But the peaks? They are undeniable. The ratio is consistently spiking up to 0.4 and even 0.5. Just think about that. A 0.5 ratio means that 50% of the entire active inventory in the city sold in a single month. That's not just a seller's market. That is an extreme, hyper-competitive seller's market. When half the available homes vanish in 30 days, it is no wonder prices have marched upward by $100,000.
And all of that speed translates directly into how long homes actually sit on the market before they're gone. When you compare the average versus the median time from listing to contract, there's a stark contrast. The average days on market usually hovers between 25 and 45 days. But remember, the average can easily be skewed by a few totally overpriced properties that just sit there for months. The real story is the median. For your typical, everyday buyer, the median time a property sits before going under contract frequently plummets to just 10 or 15 days during peak seasons. That means in the heat of the market, half of all apartments sold are snapped up in less than 2 weeks. Buyers literally do not have the luxury of time here. They are moving incredibly fast.
Which brings us to part 4, final closing realities. What actually happens at the negotiating table?
First off, we have to look at the unit-level cost escalation, specifically the median price per square foot. Whether an apartment is 500 square feet or 1,200 square feet, the cost for every single square foot of living space is climbing. Back in early 2023, buyers were paying around $800 per square foot. Fast forward through 2025 and into 2026, and that number is relentlessly pushing toward $975 a square foot. Your purchasing power is literally shrinking on a microscopic level. You are getting less physical space for your dollar today than you were just 3 years ago.
Which brings us to this very specific number, 100%. I want you to ask yourself, what kind of market conditions does it take for a seller to get exactly what they're asking for? No concessions, no price drops, just a full price offer right out of the gate. Well, let's look at the data.
We track this through the median percent of original price, which shows how close the final sale price actually was to the initial asking price. Over this entire 3-year period, the median has literally never dropped below 96%. Never. But more importantly, look at the peaks. During those high-demand cycles we talked about earlier, the median final price hits exactly 100% of the original asking price. When a market is moving this fast, with 50% absorption rates in a single month, buyers are frequently forced to just abandon any hope of aggressive negotiation. If they want the apartment, they are paying full sticker price, and the data proves it undeniably.
So, let's recap. We've looked at the $100,000 price climbs, the extreme seller's market ratios, the 2-week median closing speeds, and the harsh reality of paying 100% of the asking price. The data from 2023 to 2026 paints a very clear, completely data-backed picture of a resilient, highly competitive apartment market in Greater Vancouver. Which leaves us right back where we started, just with a whole lot more evidence. With all these compounding trends firmly established as we navigate through 2026, the final question is entirely up to you. Is now the time to make your move? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. I really hope this deep dive gave you the clarity you need to understand this fascinating market. We'll see you next time.